Hello guys, welcome back to another video. Today's video I'm going to create a really magical effect with mushroom photos. And for this special photo I'm here in the woods again. I'm gonna look for the last survivors among the mushrooms because it's already pretty cold and mushrooms don't like that. Now for this photo I'm going to take two shots. One underexposed shot to simulate it's pretty dark. And you can see it's already a grey day, a bit moody, so these are the perfect conditions to create this effect. And then the second photo will be a normal exposed photo. I'll combine both shots in one single image and light up parts of the mushroom to create this glowing effect. So without further ado, let's head into some B-roll. Right guys, I just found the perfect mushrooms to take this photo. So I'm going to set up my Nikon DSLR camera. I will use my backpack as a tripod just to make it easier for you guys and to show you that you don't need an actual tripod. But it will be way easier to use a tripod whenever you want to create this effect. So what I basically will do is I will take two photos for this shot. It's a bit based on the concept of creating an HDR photo. So basically what you're gonna do is take one photo of the mushrooms with a normal exposure and then one underexposed. So I will do that now. Okay. And then from the same position, okay guys, so we're finally in the office again, and I'm not going to take this tutorial too long. I just want to say that most of my photos unfortunately didn't work out for this edit, this particular effect. That's also part of vlogging. Not everything is a success, and I want to show you that not every photo I have in my mind works. So don't let this hold you back from creating. Just accept that not everything will work and will be a success. So without further ado, let's jump into Photoshop first. So what I already did was open one of the best photos. You can see this one here, and basically what I did was start with the normal exposed photo and then pick one overexposed shot, and this overexposed shot I already aligned it basically in Photoshop by hand. So that's one disadvantage of not using a tripod, so I highly recommend you to use a cheap tripod or something to fix your camera's position. This will help you a lot, and this is basically what made this tutorial so difficult and create this effect so difficult in my case. So what I did was reduce the opacity. That way I can basically see through the photo and try to align by rotating, scaling and transforming the photo. And one big remark is because of the lens distortion, it's really difficult to align them properly. So what I did was focus on the center part of the photo and search for the details in the mushroom's hood basically, and align those properly and ignored all the rest of the image. What I did was create a layer mask and then press Ctrl I to invert the layer mask. So basically then you make the layer invisible again. I'm gonna hide this layer for now, and I'm going to add a levels adjustment layer, and that way we will decrease the midtones a little bit to 0.9 just to make the photo, the normal exposed shot, a bit darker. I'm not gonna play too much with all other settings. You can basically achieve make the photo a bit darker by darkening up dark tones, but I'm not going to do that too much. The final color grading will be done in Lightroom anyway. So now this is our setup. So this is the light layer, and then the other one is the dark layer. Now basically we're going to use a soft brush. I will set the flow to about 10%, the opacity to 80%. This layer, and basically what I'm going to do is paint with white on the layer mask by clicking with the left mouse button on the layer mask, and just paint in at the brightest parts of the mushroom and light up the mushroom suit like that. Increase the flow a little bit to 50. It's quite a lot, so it might be too strong effect now. No, it's perfect. Now again, this effect would be way better if you just use a tripod. Okay. So basically what we will do is bring in more light in the darker parts of the hood. It would have been ideal if I underexposed this normal exposed photo even more. Okay, and you can see I need to paint out a little bit of the shadows over here, basically because it's not aligned properly. Okay. So just painting in those details. And actually I'm going to darken up the image even more by creating a curves adjustment layer and just drop down everything like this. Add a little bit of contrast by creating this soft S curve. Okay, and you can already see this is now looking a bit strange because I painted in light. Just be sure that you always paint on a layer mask and not on the actual layer itself. Okay, and now I'm going to double click on the right side of this layer, and a new window will pop up called layer style. And in this layer I'm going to play around with the blend if. And basically if you hit the Alt key on your keyboard and you click with the left mouse button on these black or white arrows, you can selectively mask out parts of this layer. So what I'm going to do is Alt click on the black arrow and it will be split into two parts. And basically what you will do is remove the upper layer or make it invisible at the darker parts of the lower layer. If you apply this effect, you can do the same with this layer, then you will basically do the other way around, and it applies to the layer you're actually working in. Actually, this might be perfect. To make it a bit more realistic, and just make it invisible in the darker parts, just to bring back those details a little bit. You can do the same with the highlights, by the way. Like this. Also notice I put it on normal mode, but basically spice things up. I'm going to use the color dodge, or the screen mode is also really cool. Color dodge. No, I'm going to stick with the screen. And basically what I can do is add another layer and add a gradient filter. Like this, and eliminate the light coming from the top of the image, like this. And that way basically we will isolate the mushroom from the background. And I'm going to, of course, oh man, I'm absolutely not happy with this edit. Maybe try with hard light. Just trying stuff out to make it better. So I'm still playing around with the blending modes. Yeah, I'm going to I'm going to play around and I'm going to set it to light. But what we're going to do is play around, and I'm going to play around a bit. I always do that this way in Photoshop, so if you don't like my workflow, I always try and look how things turn out before I actually show you my edits. So I'm going to add an orange layer to it and create it a soft light layer. Then invert the mask and paint in with a soft brush of like 10%, flow and opacity 80%, and then paint in a little bit like this. Yeah, that's what I wanted to achieve. Because the light was basically too white in my opinion. So painting a bit of orange really helps. This is a soft light. But I'm going to change the blending mode to maybe pen lights and then paint in enough like this. Okay. That's the way I want it to be. And I'm going to change the blending mode to color would be perfect, but I don't like it. Too much darken, normal. You know what? I'm just leaving it like this. Okay. I know it's not perfect, guys, but I just play around and I will fix everything in Lightroom. Okay. So what we already did was darken up the image a little bit, and I'm going to put this back to 0.95 just to bring back a little bit of details. Like this, and clear up highlights a bit as well, so like this. And now all that rests me to do is play with the blend if mode a little bit, just to bring in some shadows. Like this. I think this might be perfect. Okay, I'm going to hit save, and I'll see you back in a minute in Lightroom. And we're finally in Lightroom. I already opened up the image and I'm just going to check whether I can apply a preset of mine. If not, then we're going to show you edit from start to finish. Actually, I like this one. Moody green tones. Okay, but well, my moody green tone preset looks really good as a starting basis, but I'm going to start from scratch just to show you how you can achieve this edit. Okay, so first things first, I'm going to go straight to the camera and lens profile correction and color correction. I always do that by default. Then I'm going to crop the image 4:5 for Instagram, like this. Okay, and then we're going to play around with the edit. Temperature, I'm going to do this by hand now and add it to -40. So basically, because autumn is already over, so I want to give it some cold vibes. I might decrease the color tint to -50. Might be good. Okay, I'm not gonna touch the exposure. I'm gonna add some negative contrast, -25. As you clearly can see, what I always do is I grab the slider, I move it from the default settings to the effect I want it to be, and then basically I decrease the effect slightly just to avoid I over process my photos, and that's a really good trick you can do. So basically, for instance, if you want to correct for exposure, you set it to +1, then you reduce it to 0.80 just to avoid it's overexposed, for instance. Now the highlights, yeah, I'm going to decrease the highlights quite a lot, increase the shadows a little bit. Well, a little bit, 50% is already quite a lot. Then the white tones to +25, and then the blacks I'm gonna leave. I'm going to decrease the blacks to like -10%. Now the clarity, actually, I don't like to use clarity too much because it over processes your image. It's not realistic in my opinion, and as this photo needs this kind of dreamy look, I might do the opposite and just reduce the clarity like 30%. Okay. Now the vibrance, I might do that a little bit, like 20% will be enough. And then the saturation, yeah, I will increase the saturation with 10. Now obviously this photo is way too blue now, but I'm going to fix this later on. So the color tones, I always add 3 points, one for the shadows, one for the midtones, and one for the highlights. And the blacks and the whites, I'm going to leave them as they are for now. And then we will create this S-curve by just increasing the highlights a little bit, and the shadows we will darken those up. And the midtones, basically to simulate it's night, I'm going to decrease them slightly as well. Now what many people always avoid to do is play around with the RGB curves, and basically what you can do is play around with them, and it's a really powerful tool that will help you to improve your photo quality a lot. So the way I edit those is always the same way. I add 3 dots for the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights, and then basically I play around with them. So the reds, if you decrease the reds, you will gain blue and introduce blue. If you increase them, obviously you will introduce some red. So I'm not going to touch the shadows because the image is already pretty blue. The midtones, basically I will play around with the midtones and the highlights. Bring in some red in the hood of the mushroom like this, and we will do the same with the green tones and the blue tones. So reducing the green tones will introduce purple, and increasing will obviously introduce some green in your And then for the blues, it's the same, and the opposite color of blue is yellow, so if you go under the curve or decrease shadows, for instance, you will introduce more yellow in the image. But I like this blue, I'm just gonna slightly decrease it. And then introduce a little bit of yellow in the highlights, like this. So that's the before we played with the tone curve, and that's after. So significant difference basically. Now we are moving on to the HSL sliders. So this involves the color tones, the saturation of every color, and the luminance. The luminance is the lighting of the color. So what I'm going to do, I don't play around too much with color tones, because basically you can make or break your image with the color tones, and you can basically change the color of your yellow tones to a bit more orange or red, for instance. So all I'm going to do is play around with the orange tones, and I always light them from left to right to see what the effect is if I drastically move it. And I'm going to increase it by 5. So basically what I'm going to do is make the orange tones a bit more yellow. But as for the rest, I'm not going to play around too much. You can play around. No, I'm not gonna do that. Well, actually the green tones could be a bit more yellow as well. But that's it. Now the saturation, I really like to play around with saturation, and like I said, I'm going to decrease the saturation a little bit for the blue tones, not too much, because that's the goal of our photo, to give it this gold tone. Okay, like this. And what I'm going to do is increase the saturation of the orange tones and the yellow tones, just to emphasize the lighting on the hood. And because there's no purple or magenta in the photo, I just will decrease those colors completely. And then the luminance, this one is an important one, so what I'm going to do is light up the yellow tones by 10%, and then the orange tones, actually I'm going to darken up the orange tones just to draw attention to the hood of the mushroom and not to the background, because these leaves are yellow to orange, and it's way easier to draw attention to the hood if those are not as clear as they were. Okay, and then the blue, I'm going to play around with the blue a little bit. I'm going to light it up by 5. And magenta and purple will be darkened as well. And the red tones, maybe, no, not gonna touch the red tones. And then onto split tones. Split tones is a feature that changed in one of the latest versions of Lightroom, but unfortunately I cannot update for now because I'm working on an older laptop. But the principle is the same, only the sliders are replaced by color wheels. So basically what this function does is it gives a tint to your photos, like I'm going to do now. So you pick a color for the highlights of your photo, and that's with the color picker, like this. I'm going to add a yellow tone to it. And then the shadows, you can pick another color, and I'm going to add blue again. Now these are way too much saturated, so I'm going to decrease the saturation, because this effect should be really subtle. And decrease the blue to like 10%, and then the orange really needs to pop like this to 25, and that's it. And then we can sharpen up the image. I always put it around 65%. And then if you hit the Alt key and click with your left mouse button on the mask, then you can basically mask out the parts that are not too detailed and you don't want those to sharpen. So basically the white lines you can see on screen now are the lines that will be sharpened up in the image, like this. And then you can clearly see we have a little bit of noise in the image, and I'm going to add a luminance of 20%, and that's already pretty good. Now vignetting, I played around with vignetting in the past, and it might help to draw attention to the center of the screen, and I'm going to apply a black vignetting of -20% for now, and other than that I won't do a lot. Then haze and dehaze, I'm not going to touch this filter. Then all there rests to do is play around a little bit with the camera calibration. Now I either choose to use it a lot or just don't touch it at all, so it's all up to you. If you like this final image, then just don't touch it too much, because it will drastically change your colors in your photo. But for instance, I'm going to play around with the tones of the yellow and the green tones. Okay. I guess. So without camera calibration, and this is with camera calibration. So I played a bit around with the color tones of the leaves. Okay, and you could think this is the final image, but we're going to play around a little bit with the brush tool, and I'm going to light up the hood a little bit more. Now obviously this is way too much overexposed, and we will fix this as soon as possible. But what I often do is, whenever I use the brush tool, is change one setting drastically so I can visually see the effects of this brush I paint in. And then we will basically set everything to 0 again. Of course you can take off this mark and then you will see the mask in red, but I prefer it the other way around, just to paint in, for instance, a way too much overexposed mask and then reduce everything in the end. And I want to bring up the highlights a little bit and reduce the details in the shadows and darken up. Will I darken up? Yeah, okay, that's it. So some subtle differences, but not too much. That's it for this edit. And that's it, guys, for this video. So as you clearly can see, I sometimes struggle a lot with my edits as well. It's sometimes really difficult to obtain an effect you have in your head, or to create something you want to. So with this video I wanted to show you this effect anyway. Many of my photos I took in the forest failed to create this particular effect, but are great photos anyway, so I didn't end up with nothing. But I just want to show you that not everything turns out as you expect it to be or want it to be, but that's totally fine. It's just about creating and trying and wanting to improve upon your work. Improving, but also not being afraid of failure, because failure is the beginning of success. You need to fail and stand up again to become better. And that's what the moral of the story is today. So without further ado, I really hope you liked this video. If you didn't already, please subscribe, hit the like button, and remember, you don't need to be great to start, but start to become great. I see you in the next one. Bye!